It only took 8 seconds to derail a career, trigger a boredom investigation, and plunge the internet into a moral-feeding frenzy. 8 seconds broadcast on the Kiss Cam at a Coldplay concert, no less. Welcome to What If Horizons, the podcast that takes a sideways look at the turning points we did not see coming, and the futures they might just be creating. I am your host, and today we are wading into the murky water where professional reputation meets personal indiscretion, where human beings in suits are expected to act like androids after 6 p.m., and where one spontaneous kiss in the wrong stadium might just redefine the future of executive conduct. The scene, for those who somehow missed the avalanche of memes, reaction videos, TikTok reenactments, and ill-timed Chris Martin impressions, unfolded at Gillette Stadium on July 16th. The band had just launched into a syrupy ballad. The camera pans, as tradition dictates, from couple to couple. Kisses, cheers, the usual. Peanut lands on two individuals who clearly were not expecting to be caught in the glare. Andy Byron, the chief executive officer of a rising tech darling called Astronomer, and Kristen Cabot, its impeccably dressed and unusually camera-shy head of human resources. What followed was a masterclass in corporate damage control, only none of it happened at the concert. The two executives appeared startled. Byron leaned forward slightly. Cabot half smiled, half evaporated into her seat. The moment would have passed unnoticed, except that Chris Martin from the stage seized the opportunity to chuckle into his microphone and quip. Either they are having an affair or just very shy, thereby achieving what no Coldplay lyric ever could: total internet domination. Within hours, the video went viral. 70 million views across platforms. Hashtags bloom like weeds. A full ecosystem of reactionary content emerged. Think Gen Z couples analyzing body language. Think board middle managers making jokes about company retreats. Think armchair ethicists debating whether an executive can ever be off-duty. By July 19th, Byron had resigned. Cabot was placed on leave. The boarded astronomer, once obsessed with launching platforms in the scalable orbit, was now focused on rooting out romantic misconduct at upper altitudes. But the story here is not just about one awkward kiss or one tone-deaf quip from a man in a beanie. It is about the slippery frontier we have reached where public moments are recorded, dissected, and weaponized faster than you can say internal review. It's about a corporate culture that demands leaders be visionary but never vulnerable, authentic but never messy, inspiring but never impulsive. And it's about what happens when we as a society start confusing moral optics with actual leadership performance. Because let us be honest, the question is no longer whether executives should behave responsibly. The question is whether they are still allowed to be human. We're going to dive into the fallout, the legal conundrums, the governance nightmares, the HR paradoxes, and the cultural spiral that turns every accidental interaction into a risk assessment. We will explore what it means when privacy becomes a liability, when company policies extend into your personal relationships, and when the ability to go viral becomes a mandatory line item in your severance clause. So buckle up, pour yourself something soothing, perhaps a lukewarm oat milk latte laced with corporate dread. Let us examine the future that might just be arriving faster than anyone wanted. What if executive missteps, no matter how minor, personal, or accidental, became instant public scandals? What if being a leader meant you were always on the clock, even when you were dancing the yellow in Section 312 with someone who is not your spouse? What if we all had to choose between authenticity and employability, spontaneity and scrutiny, humanity and the quarterly report? We are about to find out. Welcome to the age where the Kiss Cam doubles as a career obituary. Welcome to What If Horizons. Let us begin. To fully understand the seismic implications of Andy Byron's televised not quite kiss, we need to rewind not to the concert, but to the contract. The executive contract, that carefully polished bundle of clauses, expectations, morality codes, and stock options masquerading as a job description, has evolved into something far more intrusive than its paper thickness might suggest. In today's corporate climate, being hired as a chief executive officer is not just a commitment to profitability, strategy, or long-term vision. It is a lifelong audition for sainthood conducted on the global stage, with a jury composed entirely of LinkedIn influencers, Reddit moderators, and your second cousin who just discovered cancel culture. Gone are the days when an executive's behavior was judged primarily in boardrooms or shareholder meetings. Now, every coffee shop encounter, every private vacation, and every wedding speech can be digitally archived, algorithmically boosted, and eternally scrutinized. And corporations, ever eager to protect their brands from even the faintest whiff of moral ambiguity, have responded with a rising tide of behavioral clauses buried deep in the fine print of leadership contracts. These clauses, often euphemistically labeled as conduct expectations or personal ethics stipulations, effectively extend the company's reach far beyond the office walls and deep into the bedrooms, dinner tables, and Instagram stories of its senior staff. Byron's case, while sensational, is merely a symptom of this broader transformation. His contract, according to leaks and a few enthusiastic corporate whistleblowers, included language about maintaining behavior consistent with the values and public image of astronomer, both on and off duty. It is a phrase so vague it might as well say no bad vibes ever. But the vagueness is the point. It grants boards the leeway to enforce their own interpretation of damage, even if the damage is less to the company's core operations and more to its public perception. And perception, as any chief marketing officer will tell you, now trumps truth. Of course, the legal industry has not missed this opportunity. Entire firms now specialize in executive morality audits. Yes, that is a real thing. They offer packages with names like reputational stress tests and viral scenario simulations wherein a team of former publicists, contract lawyers, and data scientists role-play every conceivable scandal a client might stumble into, from tweeting during a divorce to being photographed holding a vape at Coachella. For a modest six-figure retainer, these firms will essentially live inside your moral conscience, guiding you like a corporate Jiminy Cricket through the minefield of 21st century behavior. The consequences of this culture shift are not just legal or financial, they are psychological. Executives are reporting higher levels of burnout, not from overwork, but from overvigilance. The pressure to maintain a curated, scandal-proof persona 24 hours a day turns human beings into mannequins in expensive outerwear. Authenticity becomes dangerous. Humor becomes suspect. Vulnerability becomes a breach of protocol. The very qualities that often make leaders inspiring, impulse, conviction, charm, become liabilities the moment they escape the PR department's control. Consider the now common phenomenon of the apology circuit. When a misstep is made, say a drunken wedding toast surfaces or a lukewarm take on politics gets clipped and misinterpreted, the executive must begin their ritual atonement. It typically begins with a Notes app screenshot, followed by a brief leave of absence, a charity donation, a few quiet podcast appearances, and, if lucky, a slow reintegration into the corporate ecosystem like a disgraced monk returning from exile. It is spiritual purification, but with more press releases. But the cost is not just borne by the individual. Companies themselves suffer when their talent pool is filtered not by competence, creativity, or daring, but by risk aversion. When the best leaders are too afraid to lead publicly, when visionaries are muffled by policy, when humanity is treated like a glitch in the matrix rather than its operating principle, we begin to see a new kind of stagnation. Innovation stalls, culture calcifies, decision-making becomes robotic, and we are left with a generation of executives who can perfectly recite the company's purpose statement, but would panic if asked to dance at a wedding. What we are witnessing is the privatization of personality and the public colonization of what was once called personal life. And it is accelerating. Artificial intelligence tools now trawl social media for executive misbehavior in real time. Employees are asked to report not only workplace infractions, but off-site conduct that might reflect poorly on the brand. Some boards are even exploring contractual clauses that require pre-approval for public appearances, even those unrelated to the job. Unless you think this is restricted to the rarefied air of Silicon Valley or Wall Street, remember that cultural norms rarely stay at the top. What begins as a high-level precaution soon filters down into middle management, into hiring practices, into employee handbooks, and eventually into how we expect every professional to behave. Which means the next time your dentist is seen singing karaoke with a former romantic partner, or your child's principal is photographed drinking rose at a political fundraiser, you might find yourself reading a tearful resignation letter posted on their blog. We are normalizing surveillance under the guise of accountability, and the boundary between public trust and personal choice is being erased not by force, but by policy. This is not about whether leaders should be held accountable. Of course they should. But when accountability becomes a euphemism for control, when the goal is no longer ethics but image management, we must ask ourselves, what exactly are we protecting, and at what cost? Now let us detour to the boardroom, that smoke-free, ergonomic battlefield where reputational napalm is launched with the subtlety of a hand-stitched press release. After Andy Byron's moment of televised eyebrow-raising, Astronomer Inc. board assembled with the urgency of a nuclear drill and the performative gravitas of an academic ethics panel during a live-streamed scandal. Gone are the days when boards merely concerned themselves with quarterly performance and dividend forecasts. Now they must also weigh in on spiritual misdemeanors and romantic geometry. The problem, of course, is that most corporate boards are composed of people who both know the rules and know how to pretend those rules do not apply to golf weekends, offshore dinners, and the occasional cigar with morally ambiguous lobbyists. But when the cameras are rolling and hashtags are trending, even the most privately scandalous directors suddenly discover their deep and unwavering commitment to public virtue. So it was at the board of Astronomer huddled not to discuss earnings or a new product line, but to parse whether Andy Byron's enthusiastic body language violated the company's community and representation standard, which apparently includes a clause about maintaining inclusive energy at high-visibility social gatherings. Yes, inclusive energy. They had consultants define it. 3 paragraphs. The board, of course, outsourced their moral compass to a reputation recovery consultancy, kind of firm staffed by former public prosecutors, yoga instructors, and at least one person with a PhD in Twitter linguistics. This firm determined that although Byron's behavior had not technically violated any laws, policies, or common sense, it did raise the possibility of audience discomfort among stakeholders who prefer their chief executive officers to be inert beige objects whose sole function is to recite numbers and apologize for cost-cutting. The conclusion? While no public reprimand was necessary, a statement of values realignment was strongly recommended, and so 3 days later, the world was gifted a press release with the emotional depth of a parking ticket and the word reflection used more times than in a house of mirrors. Byron, ever the team player, agreed to a brief visibility pause, which in executive parlance means disappearing into a wine cave in Tuscany while junior staff post inspirational quotes on his LinkedIn. The stock dipped slightly. A rival company's publicist issued a bland statement of support while quietly pitching their own chief executive officer to financial publications. And in homes across the country, regular people laughed, shrugged, and went back to watching reality television stars do far worse things for far less pay. But beneath the surface, the message was clear. Executive privacy was now not only obsolete, it was adversarial. Your private self is either a performance or a problem. The only safe move is to become a kind of human screensaver, polished, vague, inoffensive, and slightly boring. Boards, under pressure from investors who read headlines but not balance sheets, began revisiting their governance documents. Morality triggers became standard language, along with social optics review panels and preemptive conduct reviews. One company even introduced a post-event persona assessment, requiring executives to submit a reflective statement after attending any gathering with more than 20 people. It is bureaucracy dressed in yoga pants, flexible, omnipresent, and disturbingly intimate. This brings us to a larger question. What exactly is a company protecting when it polices the personal conduct of its leadership? The legal rationale is reputational risk. The brand is an asset, and anything that diminishes public trust, whether a poor product rollout or a poorly timed tequila shot, is seen as a threat to shareholder value. But scratch the surface and you will find something deeper, more neurotic. Corporations are trying to replace culture with policy. Instead of building organizations that can survive the messiness of human behavior, they are trying to sterilize the humans. It is like buying a new couch and then banning anyone from sitting on it. Yes, it stays clean. No, it does not serve its purpose. A real organizational culture is resilient. It expects leaders to be fallible, to learn, to grow, to occasionally say something that makes the interns wince. A real culture is mature. It does not panic over wedding footage or think a chief executive officer's dating life constitutes an existential threat to a logistics firm. But that kind of culture requires effort, humility, and the willingness to accept complexity. It is easier, far easier, to simply write policies that pretend executives are animatronic mannequins with advanced financial modeling software installed in their brains. But there's a cost to this sterilization, and we are just beginning to see it. Boards now spend more time analyzing the chief executive officer's public image than their actual leadership. Succession planning is guided by optics more than competence. Risk departments have been inflated into mini surveillance states. And perhaps most dangerously, organizations begin to attract and promote leaders who are not bold, visionary, or ethical, but simply careful, unimpeachably careful. They are the bland champions of nothing, expert in avoiding offense but allergic to originality. The kind of people who never get caught dancing not because they are disciplined, but because they are too afraid to ever try. These are not leaders. They are algorithms in suits. And in an age that demands creativity, courage, and a little humanity, that is a far greater liability than any awkward moment caught on camera. Let us now wander into the grimly perfumed halls of human resources, the department that was once known for handing out parking badges and now moonlights as an internal intelligence agency tasked with moral cartography. In the new corporate order where personal conduct is public currency, human resources officers have transformed from policy librarians into inquisitors of the corporate conscience. If you sneeze near the coffee machine and someone interprets it as a microaggression toward their herbal tea ritual, expect an email from someone named Felicia with touch base in the subject line and the quiet menace of a velvet guillotine in the body text. The weapon of choice? The values audit. Not to be confused with performance reviews or skill assessments, the values audit is a spiritual MRI scan of your brand-compatible soul. It assesses whether your private thoughts, weekend hobbies, and historical Facebook likes align with the company's declared vision, which by the way was rewritten last week, to better reflect the changing tone of a recent tweet storm about penguin endangerment. At Megalink Industries, for example, the chief operating officer was summoned after posting a photograph of himself at a barbecue where one of the guests wore a vintage band t-shirt featuring what the company's AI ethics tool flagged as non-neutral visual messaging. The shirt in question bore an image of a cartoon skeleton giving a thumbs up, but because the AI lacked both cultural context and a sense of humor, the COO was asked to attend a resonance sensitivity debrief and provide a personal value statement. He submitted a haiku about shared growth and was allowed to keep his job. For now, in this brave new world, your lunch choices might be read as semiotic commentary on the supply chain crisis. Your Spotify playlist? A potential insight into your mental fitness to lead during turbulent market conditions. And God help you if you post gym selfies without the proper disclaimers that you support body positivity for all shapes, including those shaped like disgruntled eggplants. This surveillance isn't just for executives, of course. It trickles down. But executives are where it begins because they set the tone, or rather they are expected to embody the tone like ethically optimized marionettes performing for a hypervigilant audience of shareholders, customers, and teenagers with TikTok accounts. As a result, a new breed of executive training has emerged. Gone are the days of Harvard Business Review seminars on cross-border mergers. Now we have empathy coaching, micro-moment leadership labs, and my personal favorite, crisis.com for charismatic men, a weekend retreat that teaches high-earning extroverts how to maintain facial neutrality while being yelled at by climate activists. Trainers include former diplomats, wellness influencers, and one guy who used to be a mime. The sessions emphasize harmonized expression, which is a fancy way of saying, do not react like a normal person. There are entire modules devoted to perfecting the corporate apology, now considered a core executive competency. You are taught to bow with the gravitas of a monk, whisper regret like it is ASMR, and commit to learning without ever admitting fault. Bonus points if you can cry a single tear without ruining your lapel microphone. Companies love apologies. They are cheaper than lawsuits and more viral than policy change. Executives naturally hate apologies. They make them look like they are not in control. But in a culture where image is everything and privacy is dead, control is no longer about what you do. It's about how gracefully you surrender when you are caught doing it. So here we are, in a landscape where human resources serves as priest, prosecutor, and paparazzi. Their remit extends into the psychological, the spiritual, and occasionally the culinary. Some departments have even introduced pre-crisis emotional mapping, where executives are assessed for potential future problems based on past traumas, astrology, and the tonal quality of their Slack messages. The stated goal? Prevention. The actual result? Paranoia. People speak in disclaimers. Jokes arrive with footnotes. Dinners with friends are vetted for optics. Executives begin to live in a perpetual state of second-guessing, not because they fear being wrong, but because they fear being meme-ified. And that, dear listeners, is the true cost of corporate reputational anxiety. It is not merely that people are judged for their behavior, it is that they are judged before they behave. The company no longer reacts to a scandal. It tries to pre-feel it. It does not wait for outrage. It drafts apology templates in advance. It is a system built on the illusion that risk can be eradicated by emotionally neutering the people at the top. But here is the twist. Risk is not a bug. It is the entire point. Leadership without risk is like cooking without heat. You can do it, but it's going to taste like wet cardboard and no one will come back for seconds. Yet we continue to demand leaders who are flawless in public and formless in private, who have opinions but only popular ones, who live boldly but never controversially. And so we breed a generation of corporate ghosts, haunting, floating, performance-optimized entities who drift from keynote to shareholder meeting with all the charisma of a finely lacquered PowerPoint. Do they lead? Technically. Do they inspire? Occasionally. Do they feel like actual human beings? Absolutely not. But at least they will never embarrass the company by having a favorite sports team, an ex who speaks out, or a personality. In the next section, we will travel deeper into this world of executive existentialism and ask, if your persona is managed by a committee and your soul is legally audited, are you still a leader or just a very expensive brand mascot? Let us now descend into the warm, windowless underbelly of corporate communications, the war room of public relations where narrative is not just managed but sculpted like corporate propaganda clay. In the age where an executive sushi order can cause a hashtag scandal, and their vacation destination may be interpreted as an ideological stance, the public relations team has become less about pitching feel-good press releases and more about operating as an elite crisis commando unit armed with apology templates, forensic social media analysts, and spiritual consultants fluent in the language of public shame. The moment an executive is caught in some unsavory moment, be it an old college photo in a costume now deemed offensively interpretive, or an offhand remark during a webinar that implied a preference for caffeinated over decaf coffee, which the wellness community considers hostile, the PR team is activated like a smoke-jumping fire squad. Within minutes, a 12-point response plan is drafted, which includes an internal listening circle, a donation to a relevant nonprofit, and a heartfelt letter published on LinkedIn that begins with, "As someone who is always learning, I want to take a moment to reflect." And oh, the art of reflection. It has become a full-blown genre of corporate literature. Executives no longer lead with vision. They lead with remorse. Entire performance reviews now include categories like public humility responsiveness and proficiency in growth-oriented contrition. The idea is simple. If you mess up publicly, it is not enough to say sorry. You must embark on a pilgrimage of growth, preferably with a diversity consultant, a meditation app sponsorship, and a photogenic moment involving a rescue dog. Public forgiveness, after all, is increasingly treated like a subscription model. You must pay regularly and sincerely, or risk cancellation of your credibility. Meanwhile, the actual offense, if we pause to look at it, is often wildly misinterpreted or blown so far out of proportion that reality becomes a secondary concern. Truth, you see, is quaint. Optics are everything. And so public relations specialists now have to anticipate not what happened, but what might feel like it happened to someone who saw it clipped out of context in a 43-second video with ominous background music. This has given rise to the newest trend in executive support, pre-viral conditioning. Executives are now trained preemptively to avoid any movement, facial expression, or unguarded opinion that could be misread in a viral format. Entire coaching sessions are devoted to what happens when your face is paused mid-sentence and someone turns it into a meme caption. This is why the system fails. One prominent tech founder was coached to blink slower because rapid blinking was interpreted online as arrogance and deceit by amateur body language analysts with suspiciously large YouTube followings. He now blinks like an ancient tortoise delivering a TED Talk on forgiveness. It is beautiful and terrifying. Corporate PR firms have also begun hiring narrative engineers, a mix of former playwrights, TikTok trend forecasters, and one guy who used to do improv with a now-canceled Netflix star. Their job is to build story arcs for executives that emphasize redemption, vulnerability, and how deeply they care about the latest outrage without ever confirming they even understood it. The goal is to protect the stock price while convincing the public that the executive in question is not a narcissistic sea cucumber who only shows up when the champagne is cold. And then there is the legal department, hovering nearby with a quiet grimace, constantly reminding the PR team to never admit actual guilt, because that invites lawsuits. So you get statements like, "I acknowledge the hurt some have felt as a result of the discourse surrounding my actions," which translates to, "I am legally forbidden from admitting I did anything, but please do not burn down my personal brand." This delicate dance between sincerity and strategic deflection has created an entire vocabulary of executive sorrow. Regret is safer than apology. Learning moment is preferable to consequence. Personal growth is used to suggest that someone has updated their emotional firmware like a humble iPhone. And then there are the rituals, the apology video, ideally filmed in soft lighting with no makeup and at least one visible bookshelf behind them. The company town hall where people say things like, "Thank you for being vulnerable, Dave." The reappearance in a podcast where they talk about how adversity made them a better listener. It is not leadership, it is myth-making. And the audience eats it up because we have all quietly agreed to this performance. We demand that our executives be both gods and clowns, flawless and funny, assertive and apologetic. We expect them to speak out about every world event within 24 hours and to do so with exactly the right ratio of pain to hope, sorrow to vision. But do not be too dramatic. And for the love of stockholder value, do not be boring either. Just be a beacon of nuanced virtue wrapped in $1 million smile and a Twitter-proof moral compass. Of course, underneath this elaborate charade is a deeper truth. The public no longer sees the executive as a person. They are a symbol, a hologram of institutional trust, a character in the ongoing drama of capitalism. And like all characters, they can be recast, rewritten, or removed when the ratings dip. In the next section, we will explore how the rise of symbolic leadership has collided with cancel culture, algorithmic outrage, and the odd phenomenon of executives hiring narrative therapists to help them craft morally compelling backstories. Now that we have accepted that executives are no longer just leaders, but mythological figures forced to navigate the treacherous labyrinth of online perception, let us examine how modern society has merged morality with entertainment in the form of what we affectionately call cancel culture, a phenomenon that combines the subtlety of a nuclear warhead with the compassion of a cat video comment section. Cancel culture, in its purest form, was originally intended as a tool of accountability. But somewhere between the 5th apology tour and the 50th trending hashtag involving someone named Chad who wore the wrong hat to the wrong wedding in 2012, the whole process mutated into a competitive sport. Now the digital masses gather like spectators at the Coliseum, thumbs twitching above the like button, ready to decide if the chief executive officer shall be spared or devoured by the algorithmic lions. But this is no longer about justice, it is about spectacle. The fall of an executive has become binge-worthy content. News outlets compete to publish the most dramatic headline. Social media influencers film real-time reaction videos with expressions so exaggerated they belong in silent cinema. Even late-night comedians get their claws in, delivering jokes that would have been considered libel before the internet decided that mockery equals civic engagement. What we are seeing is not the collapse of leadership, but the gamification of downfall. The executive becomes a contestant on a rigged reality show called America's Next Top Accountability Sacrifice, where the rules are invented mid-season and the voting system is controlled by whoever has the strongest Wi-Fi and the least patience. This relentless cycle has created a fascinating cottage industry, the narrative therapist. Now, before you laugh, which you will anyway, a narrative therapist is not someone who listens to your problems and gives you advice. That is far too direct for the modern executive. Instead, they help you reframe your entire existence through a lens of personal transformation, vulnerability, and ideally a soft-focus photo in which you are holding a mug and staring out a window. The narrative therapist helps executives write their emotional reboot story, the tale of how, after being caught in a minor scandal involving antique furniture and 4 ounces of organic gin, they realized their true purpose was to uplift marginalized voices in artisanal manufacturing. It is like a midlife crisis, but designed to impress shareholders. These stories follow a remarkably consistent structure. Act 1 is ignorance, usually framed as "I did not realize the impact of my behavior." Act 2 is awakening, which includes yoga, atonement podcasts, and a tweet with the word grateful, used 3 times. Act 3 is redemption, often delivered through a speaking tour, an op-ed in a legacy newspaper, or the launch of a suspiciously well-funded nonprofit named after a vague. And the public? They eat it up. Not because they believe it, but because they need the plot twist. The redemption arc is the dopamine hit that makes the drama worthwhile. Nobody wants a character to simply vanish. They want the story to end with closure, a lesson, and ideally a photo shoot in which the executive stands beside a child they did not raise, planting a tree they will never water. The absurdity here is not that executives are trying to manipulate public opinion. That is older than capitalism itself. The absurdity is that we, the audience, are demanding emotional authenticity from individuals whose entire careers are built on plausible deniability and performance-based incentives. Expecting genuine remorse from a person who got a $30 million severance package after being caught plagiarizing a keynote speech is like expecting an artificial intelligence chatbot to cry because it learned empathy. This is performance art with spreadsheets. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of all this is the timing. Scandals no longer unfold over months. They detonate in hours. One poorly worded comment caught on a hot mic during a quarterly earnings call can be clipped, posted, viralized, interpreted, misinterpreted, memified, politicized, and condemned by an entire ideological ecosystem before the executive even finishes their morning smoothie. The speed at which reputational collapse occurs has made it impossible for any human being to respond with real-time wisdom. And so executives are left with two options: hide behind a fortress of lawyers and crisis consultants, or preemptively design a personal brand so wholesome, so diverse, so charity-adjacent that even if they were caught arguing with the barista over oat milk viscosity, they could spin it as a meditation on conflict resolution. And let us not ignore the role of internal corporate dynamics. These moments of external scandal are also moments of internal politics. Every time a chief executive officer faces the wrath of the public, there are at least 3 ambitious vice presidents circling like vultures with inspirational quotes already queued up on their professional networking profiles. The modern workplace does not forgive. It reorganizes. The boardroom is no longer a place of vision. It is a gladiatorial arena in which survival depends less on performance metrics and more on how convincingly you can cry during an employee town hall while referencing your childhood piano lessons. The ridiculousness of it all is that everyone knows it is ridiculous. Executives know they are pretending. The public knows they are pretending. Shareholders pretend not to notice. Journalists pretend they are shocked. And social media? Social media pretends it is a form of justice when in fact it is just another subscription service to emotional chaos. And in this sea of collective pretending, the only real truth is that no one is safe. Not because they are bad leaders, but because they are now characters in a never-ending morality play with no script, no intermission, and a cast of millions who expect transformation by episode 3. In the next part, we will examine the economic ripple effects of all this chaos. How executive scandals, once limited to cocktail party whispers, now have tangible consequences for hiring trends, insurance premiums, and whether anyone in the human resources department is brave enough to approve the next leadership retreat. If you ever wanted a glimpse into the butterfly effect of executive embarrassment, look no further than the modern job market, where the mere rumor of a scandal involving a company's chief executive officer is enough to send recruitment teams into a cold sweat and human resources professionals fleeing to meditation retreats in the Himalayas. Welcome to the era where one executive's decision to scream at a waiter in Ibiza can trigger a 1% dip in the company's hiring pipeline and a 30-page internal memo titled "Reaffirming Our Culture of Empathy." Let's start with insurance, because yes, there is now such a thing as reputation risk insurance. It used to be that a company insured itself against fire, floods, and data breaches. Now it insures itself against the chief financial officer's college roommate releasing a 20-year-old video where they both play beer pong while quoting Shakespeare in a tone that could be interpreted as elitist. Insurance actuaries now include sections for moral volatility and potential outrage multipliers. These are actual terms invented by people with serious suits and no sense of irony who gather in sterile offices to calculate just how damaging it would be if a senior executive is seen liking the wrong post on a professional networking platform. From hiring to compliance, the ripple effects spread like a spreadsheet virus. Candidates applying to companies with recent executive scandals suddenly demand detailed ethics policies, mental wellness stipends, and pre-interview assurances that their boss will not be arrested mid-quarter. And why not? The modern job seeker is not just looking for a paycheck. They are looking for moral alignment, emotional intelligence, and the promise that the person approving their expense reports has not publicly denied the existence of climate change while riding a private jet to a blockchain summit. Companies, of course, are responding in the most corporate way possible by adding new departments. Enter the Vice President of Executive Oversight, an entirely new breed of middle management whose job is to monitor the online and offline behavior of people already making 15 times their salary. These brave souls sit in dark rooms, combing through facial expressions, tone analysis, and even the frequency of vacation photos posted from yachts. Babysitters for adults with too much money and not enough impulse control. But perhaps the most poetic development is the rise of the apology algorithm. Yes, companies are now using software, actual software, to help determine the optimal structure, tone, and timing of executive apologies. These algorithms take into account past apology trends, cultural climate, public sentiment, and even the lunar cycle if it helps soften the blow. The resulting statements read like sterile haikus designed by sentient office furniture. I acknowledge your feelings. I reflect. I grow. Let us move forward together. It is corporate remorse boiled down to an emotionless equation. And it works, because public forgiveness, much like public outrage, is now transactional. Give the people enough keywords, accountability, healing, inclusion, and they will reluctantly move on. Until the next incident. Meanwhile, human resources departments have entered their tragicomic renaissance. No longer just a quiet corner of the building where onboarding documents went to die, human resources has become the moral compass of the corporate galaxy. They host seminars with titles like Managing Through the Media Storm and Leadership Decorum in the Age of Surveillance. There are now workshops where executives are taught how to look genuinely concerned without actually promising anything, and breakout sessions on eye contact and apology cadence for high-stakes press conferences. It is absurd, it is theatrical, and it is mandatory. The real kicker, however, is how all of this shapes the internal psyche of employees. When you work at a company where the chief operating officer was just caught in a 3-part podcast expose involving rare cheeses and offshore bank accounts, you begin to question your own life choices. Morale becomes an unstable chemical compound. Productivity dips not because people are lazy, but because nobody wants to pitch a new idea to a chief executive officer who might be in legal depositions before lunch. Trust becomes the currency no one is printing. And then there are the interns, the poor, wide-eyed interns who joined the company because of its progressive mission statement, only to spend their first week updating a crisis communication spreadsheet while listening to podcasts about the fall of their chief executive officer. They entered the corporate world hoping to learn skills and discover purpose, and they leave understanding how to scrub metadata from apology videos. The result of all this chaos is a collective exhaustion, a quiet corporate burnout, not from workload, but from moral whiplash. Employees are tired of pretending they believe the chief executive officer's tearful confession. Investors are tired of watching stock prices bounce like hyperactive toddlers every time a board member's sibling tweets something tone-deaf. Even the general public, those ever-faithful participants in the digital dunking contest, are starting to feel a twinge of fatigue. And yet the machine marches on, powered not by logic or leadership, but by the insatiable demand for drama. The question is not whether this system is sustainable. It obviously is not. The question is how long it can continue before the sheer absurdity of it all leads to collapse, or worse, acceptance. In the next part, we will explore whether there is any path forward from this reputational purgatory. Is redemption real? Can trust be rebuilt? Or are we doomed to live in a world where executives are not leaders, but performance artists constantly dodging invisible tomatoes thrown from the virtual balcony? Redemption, in the classical sense, used to be about atonement and transformation, a deeply personal journey toward betterment guided by principles, regret, and the occasional inspirational montage. In the age of viral leadership scandals, however, redemption has become less about moral growth and more about narrative rebranding. Executives caught in disgrace no longer disappear to reflect and evolve. They vanish into temporary exile only to re-emerge 3 months later on a TEDx stage titled something like "What My Scandal Taught Me About Authenticity," wearing a turtleneck and adopting a more subdued introspective tone that vaguely resembles a meditation app with stock options. The redemption arc is now a curated sequence of media hits, think pieces, soul-searching podcasts, and strategic philanthropy. A chief marketing officer who was filmed berating a barista will spend exactly 74 days offline, emerge with a nonprofit focused on coffee worker dignity, and go on to be featured in a documentary called From Froth to Forgiveness. And audiences, bless their collectively short attention spans, will cautiously applaud, not necessarily because they believe it, but because redemption narratives have become content. They are bingeable, digestible, and profitable. Corporations, eager to restore investor confidence and mitigate reputational bleeding, often script these arcs with the precision of military operations. There are redemption playbooks. There are consultants whose sole job is to engineer the ideal timeline between scandal and comeback, adjusting for variables like media saturation, geopolitical news cycles, and the mood on social media. A well-timed hurricane or celebrity breakup can do wonders to create just enough distraction for an executive to quietly relaunch as a thought leader. The machinery of redemption has become so industrialized that sincerity is now optional. But beneath all this glittery reputation, repair scaffolding lies a rotting foundation, the erosion of trust. When employees, customers, and the public at large begin to see every apology as a branding move, every charitable donation as strategic deflection, and every emotional interview as crisis choreography, then genuine trust becomes unachievable. It is like trying to fill a leaking boat with a spoon. The public may tolerate these redemptions, but they no longer believe them. This disbelief manifests in a new and dangerous corporate culture, one built on preemptive suspicion and manufactured transparency. Leaders now walk on metaphorical eggshells, not because they have grown more empathetic or socially aware, but because they know every action is potentially evidence. The boardroom becomes a theater of performative goodness. Executives compliment interns' ideas not because they value them, but because the intern might have 400,000 followers on a short video platform and a taste for irony. Emails are composed like legal depositions. Town hall meetings feel like hostage negotiations with the audience holding the invisible weapon of virality. Some companies have tried to institutionalize redemption through policy. There are now formal guidelines for executive misconduct recovery, including steps like public listening tour, nonprofit initiative launch, and the fan-favorite fireside chat with industry influencer. These guidelines are often laughably tone-deaf and managed by committees with titles such as the Council for Trust Renewal, which sounds like a futuristic tribunal from a dystopian novel, but is in fact a real thing that exists in multiple Fortune 500 companies. Others have gone more creative, investing in AI-driven sentiment analysis tools that monitor public response to every apology and adjust the communication strategy accordingly. If the software detects insufficient remorse detection metrics, the statement is rewritten. The lighting in the next video is softened, and the executive's clothing is made 20% more earth-toned to convey humble vulnerability. Yes, we live in a world where algorithms correct your facial expression for better forgiveness optimization. The inevitable side effect of all this redemption theater is the calcification of cynicism. Employees stop raising real concerns because they believe nothing will change unless it affects the brand. Consumers stop giving feedback and start weaponizing screenshots. Shareholders quietly install reputational clauses in their investment portfolios. Apathy spreads like mold in the soul of corporate culture. And perhaps most tragically, leaders who genuinely wish to grow, who sincerely regret their mistakes and want to do better, are now lumped in with the performers. Their apologies are dismissed as PR, their initiatives questioned, their motives dissected not by their actions but by the timing of their comeback. In a world where redemption is processed like a marketing campaign, authenticity becomes collateral damage. The one glimmer of hope, the barely flickering pilot light in this gas-filled chamber of image management, is that the exhaustion might eventually lead to a craving for the real thing. That people, fed up with sanitized apologies and redemption arcs with reduction credits, might begin to demand unvarnished humanity. Not perfection, not performance, but the messy, clumsy, uncomfortable reality of actual accountability. Maybe, just maybe, a future awaits where an executive can say, "I messed up. I did harm. I'm here to listen, not speak. I will step away not because I was told to, but because I need to become the kind of person this role requires." And then actually do the work privately, without cameras, without hashtags, without a book deal. But until then, we will remain trapped in the strange loop of scandal and spin, of humiliation and healing retreats, of headlines and heart emojis. In Part 9, we will explore whether structural reform is even possible in this theater of reputational absurdity, or whether corporations will simply continue building bigger stages for increasingly meaningless performances. At some point in the ongoing spectacle of boardroom shame, public outrage, and carefully engineered contrition, someone inevitably stands up and asks the question that's been buried under 10,000 apology videos and redemption retreats: what if we actually fixed the system? Not rebranded it, not duct-taped it with crisis communication teams and performative empathy coaches, but structurally reformed how executive power is held accountable. What if the world stopped waiting for executives to implode spectacularly and instead created frameworks that would make such implosions both preventable and, frankly, unprofitable? It sounds simple enough. The kind of thing that would be scribbled on a sticky note during a progressive leadership seminar. Transparency, accountability, integrity. But in the reality of corporate governance, those words are often treated more like scented candles than policy blueprints. Nice to have, but not something you build a house with. Still, let us entertain the idea. Suppose companies began to view executive conduct not as a personal matter or a public relations issue, but as a systemic risk, the same way they view data breaches or environmental violations. This would require real-time behavior monitoring, not in the dystopian sense of cameras in locker rooms or biometric emotional scans, although given current trends in workplace surveillance, that might not be entirely off the table. Rather, it would mean codifying behavior standards into contractual obligations, enforceable not by internal memos or a strongly worded email from human resources, but through independent third-party review boards with teeth. Boards composed not of cronies, golf buddies, or fellow yacht enthusiasts, but of ethics professionals, employee-elected representatives, and, just to keep things honest, one very angry former intern with a vendetta and a podcast. These boards would not wait for scandal to erupt. They would proactively audit leadership culture, investigate whistleblower claims without delay, and have the authority to enforce financial penalties, claw back bonuses, and even recommend dismissal. Imagine an executive who knows that their multi-million-dollar stock grant is contingent not just on quarterly performance, but on how they treat subordinates in elevators, and whether they manage to go one full calendar year without insulting a barista, crashing a luxury vehicle during a midlife crisis, or joining any private clubs with the word heritage in the name. Naturally, the business world would recoil at the suggestion. Words like overreach, micromanagement, and due process would fly like confetti in a billionaire's bunker. But that is only because the current system was built precisely to insulate executives from the consequences of their own behavior. Leadership culture, especially at the highest echelons, is based on the ancient but unspoken assumption that power purifies. That if someone has risen to such heights, their flaws are not flaws but misunderstood genius. They do not have tempers. They are passionate. They are not manipulative. They are strategic. They do not ignore consent. They are romantically spontaneous. To replace this mythology with boring old responsibility is to threaten the entire theater of corporate divinity. And yet, if the last decade has taught us anything, it is that pretending these people are gods does not make them less likely to commit moral crimes. It just makes them better at hiding them. Real reform would require courage not from the public, who have already been courageously angry for years, but from shareholders and boards, who must finally realize that protecting executive misbehavior is no longer a good investment strategy. In fact, it is a risk. A quantifiable, spreadsheet-busting, lawsuit-attracting, reputation-obliterating risk. And as with any risk, there are tools to mitigate it. Independent oversight, performance reviews that include ethical conduct, bonus structures that reward not just profit, but workplace wellness, leadership training that does not just teach how to dominate a meeting, but how to not be a colossal liability in public. And yes, perhaps even a cultural shift where a powerful person behaving decently is not treated as a heroic surprise, but as the bare minimum for employment. The real kicker, of course, is that such a system might not just prevent disgrace. It might create better companies. Leaders who know they will be held accountable for their personal actions may be less inclined to surround themselves with enablers, fewer yes people, and more you really should not do that people. The trickle-down effect could be extraordinary, a culture where ethics are not just a paragraph in the mission statement, but something that gets someone promoted. But reform requires admitting the system is broken, and that is the hardest part. Because for every executive taken down by scandal, there are a dozen more watching, sweating, calculating exactly how much they can get away with before the public cares. And as long as that calculus remains viable, if the potential rewards outweigh the risks, then no number of apology tours or viral exposés will ever fix the root problem. In Part 10, we will close this saga by examining whether society, investors, and leadership itself are ready to move from reaction to prevention, or whether we are doomed to keep rewatching the same show. Different executives, different scandals, same old script, but increasingly expensive popcorn. And so here we are, standing at the end of this cautionary corporate carousel, dizzy from scandals, disillusioned by apologies, and desperately wondering if there is any real appetite left for meaningful change. Because let's be honest, we're not sure on evidence. We have had more than enough headlines featuring executives behaving like medieval lords on vacation from accountability, their private indiscretions detonating like time bombs across public trust, brand value, and employee morale. We have seen the videos, read the text, parsed the open letters, and endured the smirking, heavily lawyered press conferences where grown adults swear they did not know that tax-funded wellness retreats for C-suite executives to de-stress from their yacht-buying fatigue might look bad to the janitor who has not had a raise since the Obama era. But now the question is not whether this is a problem. It is whether anyone is actually going to fix it. And that, my dear listeners, depends not on executive enlightenment, which we can all agree is as likely as a stock buyback benefiting middle management, but on pressure. Sustained, targeted, legally inconvenient pressure. Because behind every powerful executive shielding their secrets with high thread count discretion is a boardroom, a shareholder group, a lobbyist, and a lawyer who helped them get there. And those are the leverage points. It starts with shareholders demanding ethical performance metrics, not just quarterly returns. You want your stock options? Here is a bonus if you make it through the year without a harassment complaint or a confidential settlement. It means institutional investors, those sleepy behemoths holding the keys to billions, finally realizing that reputational risk is not abstract, it is quantifiable. One good scandal can knock 10% off a market cap and send talent fleeing like rats from a luxury cruise liner with a cracked hull. It means employee activism growing bolder, unions negotiating not just for wages, but for workplace dignity, for whistleblower protections, for transparency about who is leading them and how. And yes, it means regulators pulling their heads out of their revolving doors and drafting laws that do not just fine companies after the fact, but require proactive systems for behavioral accountability at the top. Background checks not just for fraud, but for, say, 47 non-disclosure agreements with former assistants. Ethics reviews that are more than a PowerPoint with clip art of a handshake. And let us not forget you, dear consumer, the wide-eyed, phone-wielding audience of this reality series. You wield more power than you think. You choose where to spend, whom to follow, whose statements to share, and whose products to boycott. When private misconduct becomes public outrage, your attention becomes currency. Your demand for better becomes a thunderclap in the executive suite. But only if you keep demanding it. Only if you do not fall for the curated comeback arc in the next line of I am growing as a person apparel. Now, do I think we are truly ready to enter this brave new world of ethical leadership and preventative design? Probably not. Let us be honest. The machine still favors the charming sociopath with plausible deniability and a media-trained smile. But I do believe the cracks are widening. I believe every scandal forces a conversation that will not go back into the box. And I believe the more we treat executive behavior as a public concern, regulated, reviewed, reformed, the closer we get to a world where leadership means accountability, not invincibility. In a better timeline, companies would treat ethical leadership like cybersecurity, a constant investment, a non-negotiable budget item, and a thing that when it fails, gets someone fired. And perhaps someday, the notion that a chief executive officer's conduct should reflect the values they plaster all over the lobby wall will not be controversial. It will be expected, maybe even boring. And what a glorious boredom that would be. So here's your homework. Ask your companies what their code of conduct means in practice. Ask your board why the ethics committee meets quarterly, but the party planning team gets weekly lunches. Ask your investments whether your money is propping up someone who thinks labor laws are a suggestion and public image is a costume. Because if enough of us start asking loudly and persistently, then maybe, just maybe, we stop catching the fallout of private behavior and start preventing the blast. And that brings us to the end of this episode of What If Horizons, where we dream of strange futures and inconvenient realities with equal glee. If you found yourself nodding, laughing, or growling in righteous indignation, do us a favor. Share this episode, follow the show, and tell that one coworker who has not updated their LinkedIn photo since the Bush administration. Next time, we tackle an equally wild scenario that might just be around the corner. Until then, remember, integrity is not just a buzzword. It is an insurance policy. And some executives are long overdue on their premiums. See you next time.